All right, hi everyone, good evening, and welcome to the Retro Horror Panel. We will start with introductions. We'll start at the end with Clarissa.
Awesome. Hi, yes? Hearable? Great.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Clarissa Goldsmith. Would say our interest in horror, or who I am?
Who you are, your pronouns, and just your introduction to your relationship with retro horror.
Solid, yeah. Alright, so I'm Clarissa Goldsmith. I go by they, them. My relationship with horror is loved it from childhood, loved it all throughout. I recently got my PhD studying multicultural horror, specifically Latinx horror, but my interest in retro horror is like the hobby side of my interest, because all of my school stuff, my research was very contemporary. So retro horror is a passion and a love, and fits into like my larger love of genre.
Oh, come back here, maybe.
Hi, I'm Charlene. My pronouns are she, them. I am an ASM and production assistant for live theater. What brings me to this panel is that I have been talking about horror here for about 5, maybe 8 years so far. And outside of talking extensively about the Twilight Zone, I've never been on a panel talking about retro horror, and I'm very excited to talk about it.
Hello everyone, I am Jason, aka The Vern. I'm one of the hosts of Cinema Recall, and the reason why I know about retro horror is because I'm the old guy at this panel that was around when these movies first came out. And I go by he, him, you, hey asshole, yeah.
My name is Melissa Kaercher. Is this on again? Oh, battery
Dead. Yeah, this one I believe is, you can take
Okay, well,
I was going to say take a hit on that, but
That's right, didn't need to steam your
go
microphone.
for it. Listen,
Yeah. Alright. My name is Melissa Kaercher. I'm one of the movie nerds that's been floating around CONvergence since day one. I've had various podcasts about movies. Currently running is Xanadu Cinema Pleasure Dome.
I love it so much.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
And my relationship with retro horror is I was a movie nerd since about 3 years old when my mother took me to Star Wars over and over and over in the theaters, and I was doomed from then. That wasn't horror, but the garbage pit was pretty scary at that age.
Awesome. I'm Skazka. Scott. Use they, them, and him pronouns. Typically in the other order, but it doesn't actually matter. I was very easily frightened as a child. I had a series of nightmares based on a promotional video for Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, which is one of my earliest brushes with horror. And my parents were not big horror people, except if it involved a director who referenced places they had once lived. So John Carpenter, for some reason, was all in, and I'm like, damn, not good taste, but also not necessarily what I would have picked as my introduction to horror. But I was able to get gradually into kind of the exposure therapy version of getting into, especially older horror. And now I do horror fiction, horror writing, and in general, kind of the studies side of that whole thing for shits and gigs. I do not get paid, but it would be cool if I did.
Same goes for many of us. Okay, so I figured we'd spend just a couple minutes debating on the definition of retro horror, because when I looked up the term retro on the internet, nobody agrees on anything. It was anything from like 20 to 40 years old, or the distinction of vintage, it's something that is authentic from that era, from at least 20 years ago. Well, retro is new items that have been made to imitate items of the past.
So if we're talking retro horror, we can only talk about like The Love Witch.
Yes. Well, I mean, there are other movies such as they got Flux Gourmet in Fabric.
With like XP retro horror, because
and Pearl, but yeah, we got tons of that, but we can end on that. But I figured, I've been communicating through email with all of you, and I know we all had this love of going through the old VHS aisles. So, shall we? I believe we have visual aids.
So I brought these from home because I am that jerk that still collects physical media because I love it dearly. These
The
are
jerk who will sing a song.
Yes.
now. I don't know if people can remember going into video stores and actually seeing these titles come up on the shelf, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? Wait, this guy, he's at a theater holding a ticket. What's gonna happen? What am I seeing here? I've got no idea, but I'm totally intrigued. This skull with eyeballs right there is grinning at me. Is it scary? Is it comedy? I don't know. And this psychotic and Jack Nicholson right there in the doorway. Now, during the time before internet and everything, the way you got to know about all these horror films is just through word of mouth. Like your friend comes to you like, oh my gosh, I won't believe what happened here in this movie. This guy gets his arm possessed. He starts like hitting his face, and then he gets his arm cut off and makes into a chainsaw. Like, that sounds freaking awesome. Or people talking about Jaws, like, dude, in the movie Jaws, this little kid's like on the raft, and the shark just like teats him and like eats him, and like blood just pours everywhere. And they also brought me to real quickly. I got a couple of lasers just here.
Nice. Oh my god.
And
Beautiful.
the thing that was cool about lasers is because right here it says, widescreen director's cut. And like director's cut, that means I'm going to see more blood and gore and action right there. And I got Nosferatu, Werner Herzog's remake with Klaus Kinski and Isabella Adjani. Still trying to find a copy of Possession because that's one of the best horror films.
Yeah, that is a holy grail to find.
Yes.
That had distribution problems for decades. I was saying before the panel, this was actually the first VHS I purchased with my own money. Back when VHS tapes cost like $80.
More than that sometimes. Too.
Yeah. I walked into Tidal Wave in Crystal, Minnesota, right? And I have the clamshell of Creepshow. But yeah, my mom got me started on Stephen King books when I was like 7, and because in the 70s kids just went feral, and I was one of them.
Probably Stephen King, probably everyone's like first introduction into horror is through stories.
Or even just the cover art on the Stephen King books, because Night Shift was the thing of my night terrors.
Is that the one with like
the eyeballs on the hand?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we are totally monopolizing this.
But no, the trend continued into the 90s because like my first introduction to horror was also Stephen King books. That I think the first one that I read was It, and the first movie that I saw was Carrie. That was supposed to be solidly in the horror genre. And so parents still just allow their children to go feral so far as I have experienced.
So my dad was, he was the one who got to make the more lackadaisical choices of what I watched rather than my mom. And he was really into like showing us like, Dracula, Frankenstein, all that good stuff. And we were at the movie theater, or at Blockbuster, and he's like, let's watch this one this week. And it's Night of the Living Dead. I'm 7. I'm 7. And I'm like, but Dad, it says R on the back. He's like, it's not that scary. We go home, he puts it on, I watch it from behind the couch, my brother's on the stairs, and it was horrifying. But it really began that like tradition of like going to the video store, finding the movie with the best cover once my dad was like, do your thing, and seeing The Evil Dead for the first time with like her hand reaching up. I know it's not technically retro, but do you guys know Blood Surf, the crocodile movie?
Yep.
No.
Okay, the cover is this huge saltwater crocodile, mouth open, and these 2 surfer dudes like riding the crest away from this crocodile. Terrible movie, but it's the kind of cover that really made me love horror because I needed to know why were there surfers and crocodiles.
The boss art of Jaws always scared me because when I was a little kid, they took me to Universal Studios, and I had no idea what Jaws was, but I knew Woody Woodpecker, and I knew the other things there. So we're on this bus, and we go to where there's like riverside and whatnot, and there's a guy fishing on a boat, and I see Finn coming for the boat. And I'm like, shark! I know what sharks are. I'm like, shark, you're bad. I'm like, shark! There's a shark! There's like people, and like, screaming my mom to do something. I'm screaming at everyone, somebody do something. Nobody's listening to me because I'm a little kid, and they're like, no, just don't worry about it, it's fine. And then the shark fin comes towards the boat, the guy tips over, and blood shoots out of the water. Like this geyser of blood, and then the shark comes about like this close to my face. And just terrified from that movie for like a long time, and every time I go in the video store, I do not put past a certain section because I know that's where the Jaws art is. And it's a Jaws 2 box art and Jaws 2, that shark's coming out of the water right there, but that shark's there to get me.
On the theme of like encounters through fragments, whether that's like box art in the video store or encountering stuff at Universal Studios that sounds absolutely hair-raising, I guess definitely the VHS is at the movie store era for me, but where I was terrified in the box art of the 1997 direct-to-VHS horror movie Jack Frost.
Oh,
I'm like, I don't understand what this movie's about. I don't understand why this looks like this. And I'm so friggin' scared. But there was also the era of those 100 greatest movie scares. And they'd be playing on like the 13 Nights of Halloween block on cable or whatever. And you'd see something completely decontextualized from the rest of the film. And my brain would be trying to fill in like, why? I think it was the ending of the OG Friday the 13th. I was like, why is that boy in the lake? Why did he jump out? I'm like, it scared me, and it scared me in a way that watching the actual film did not and would not have. Because you're in that position of your imagination's completely running wild. And that's something where I think the element of either movies that are hard to find or movies that a friend has told you about that you're having to track down before the era where I can just go on and pirate most things, not everything, is the tantalizing part of horror, where your imagination is kicking into high gear before you're even able to access it.
Well, there's also the forbidden fruit aspect. That's like, and it's right there, it's in a box, and the whole movie's in that box. And extra! It looks so terrifying. It's a terrible movie. But, oh my God, did I want to see it when I was a child.
Speaking about clip shows, have you ever seen the movie Terror in the Islands?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a movie that came out in late '84,
Yep.
and it's hosted by, I looked this up here, Don Pleasance and Nancy Allen.
Yep.
And they're in a theater, and they're showing clips of horror movies. And that was a lot of my introduction to horror, is just seeing clips of older horror movies, and just seeing like the end scene from Carrie, or just seeing stuff like Dawn of the Dead and all the real little effects right there. So that was like my first introduction. Halloween, all the good scares that happened in that one.
There's also, Stephen King came out with a book in the mid-'80s named Dance Macabre. Some of you know it.
Sputnik chapter.
The Sputnik chapter, yes, and it's basically Stephen King giving an autobiographical account of what scared him as a kid, and then he goes into basically the history of horror and movies and books that influenced him. And he thought, it's basically Stephen King's watch list, and it's like, you could just go through and check it, seen that, oh, Dementia 13, oh. And it has led me to lovely discoveries of older films over the years. There's also, by the way, going back to books, is anybody familiar with Paperbacks from Hell?
Yes.
Right!
Okay.
If you would like.
Go for it. Paperbacks from Hell, I'm curious if it began as a blog, because it has that zesty, image-heavy format. There's a wonderful book by, I think, Grady Hendrix, that collects the cover art of kind of retro, I think it's mostly 70s, 80s, and a little bit of the 90s, kind of illustrated vintage horror paperback covers. And thankfully it has resulted in a bunch of these books getting republishing for sometimes for the first time since their initial run, often through Valancourt Books. Big ups to them. They're working both horror and LGBTQ novels that have fallen out of print. But the visuals are very much in line with, almost in excess of what you see in kind of poster art, the idea that there's one image that's supposed to grab you and make you want to, this is the one that I want to buy, this is the one that I want to explore further. Often scarier than the book itself, often much weirder. but I was absolutely terrified of the made-for-TV adaptation of Flowers in the Attic from the 90s, which I'm like, I would say Flowers in the Attic is gothic, but I would not say that those books frighten me in the same way, but just the atmosphere that you can get in some of this cover art really got under my skin.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a look to all the paintings that were on paperbacks at that time, and the way they were produced and to make them even more eye-catching, they'd have bust covers and silver foil and holographics.
Step-back covers.
Yeah.
It's like a little frame. When you open it up, there's another picture inside.
Yeah, it's like fold out and it changes. And yeah, it's the advertising of the 1980s was incredible. Does anybody else have memories of just like box art or cover art that they want to share?
You guys remember that? I never saw it. Also, I'm 30, so I wasn't looking at VHSs, I was looking at DVDs. But it was a woman, back to you, her hair was braided into a noose.
Oh yes!
Okay, I've been trying to find that movie for forever, so thank you. That was
So
the only
good.
purpose of this, is I just really needed to know what that was.
Handful of horror fans.
It's a really good movie.
Excellent, I hope so, because that's the one that's like, it's right in my brain for forever, just except not the title.
It has like a really kind of a good, nice ending to it, and it's a comedy horror film. Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it. They're saying in the body, just gotta watch it.
I would say that the one that attracted me just from the box art or the DVD art was when I saw it in a place with rubber.
Oh,
I love Regency.
I'm not really into, or I wasn't really into things like Thanksgiving or whatever, things that are like really silly
So bad it's
at the time. But I'm scrolling through and I see just a picture of a tire, and it's called Rubber, and it's in horror, and I'm like, how is the tire scary? Is it running people over a bunch? And then I watch it and I'm like, it explodes people's heads.
Yeah.
Lit. And it's one of my favorite horror movies
But
now. But like the attraction was, yeah, there's a whole lot more than just the...
I would just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But it was like the fact that it explained almost nothing. That actually enchanted me was not like the tantalizing of like, how do these pieces fit together? But like, what are the pieces? You're giving, the puzzle hasn't even, you're not giving me anything other than a tire. And I mean, that is exactly what I got, but yeah, like, Jesus.
I would just like to note that Rubber is made by a filmmaker named Quentin Dupieux, who I absolutely adore, and all of his movies are like that. He made one called Deerskin about a guy who becomes obsessed with his leather coat, and it starts talking to him. And he starts killing people because the coat tells him to. Right, yeah, pretty much anything with him as a director is worth watching because it's absolutely bananas.
His music is really good too. He's a Mr. Weasel.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So let's see. Where do we go?
I kind of have a hijack, but I kind of have a thought.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think makes retro horror really interesting to watch now and to think back on is, and we always talk about how like horror is like a representative of like common political attitudes and what's monstrous. You guys all know that, yeah. And I feel like retro horror can be these really great like capsules of like political moments. I had a strange fascination with second wave feminism and all of its problems, but to me, like thinking about retro horror stuff like Rosemary's Babies, The Stepford Wives, The Haunting of Hill House, Possession even as like sort of like these like quasi liberation stories, and so like that's one of my main draws to retro horror, and I didn't know if like, what's up with that with you guys?
Oh yeah.
I would absolutely concur. Also, if you really like, if you want a really interesting and surprisingly sympathetic and gentle exploration of kind of second wave feminism and horror, Season of the Witch by
Oh yeah.
it's a guy who did Martin. It's set in
George Romero.
Yes, some better known for other work, some
Yes.
would say. It's set in suburban Pittsburgh, and it is a extremely unfulfilled and unhappy housewife and her daughter both exploring kind of liberation via witchcraft, and it rips. It is a very odd-looking, not aesthetically appealing. I often contrast it to The Love Witch because there's blue eyeshadow in both, but it is a very different effect when it's on somebody who looks like one of my aunts. But that element of, I really like the element of exploring kind of what was the tensions of the time and kind of societal changes through horror is a big thing that attracts me to older horror. And there's also an element of, I like being able to draw a line between themes in earlier works of horror and works that may not necessarily know that they're tapping, even if they're not directly inspired by an earlier work, maybe somebody hasn't encountered it or it's not likely that the filmmakers encountered it. It's tapped into the same vein of something that's going on in the culture or in the psyche that makes it a weird companion piece to maybe a later film.
Yeah, going off of that too, I want to recommend the movie May.
May is fantastic.
Lucky McKee, Angela Bettis, about a girl who just wants to find a friend because she works as a veterinarian and doesn't really know anyone that well. She has a doll that her mother gave her that's kept in a glass case, and she never let the doll out. And she dates this, or she has this crush on this boy, and this boy turns on her, and then people start to turn on her so much that she has to create her best friend, and she does it by taking body parts of people because she likes someone's neck or someone's arms or someone's legs, and she's building this super friend. And it's such a great tale about someone's loneliness, and your heart just breaks for this girl. It's almost like breaking for Frankenstein's monster, and I just found it to be very heartwarming.
Yeah, I always think that horror is at its best when it is going after the current zeitgeist, and it becomes a kind of a, it just goes for those push buttons of the day, and it's a way to kind of release fears about those things. There's actually a panel I'm doing later this weekend, tomorrow I believe, about the Satanic Panic. And it overlaps with this stuff because a lot of the films that we got and books that we got in the late 70s and all through the 80s were a reaction to or part of the Satanic Panic. And the Satanic Panic being when this wave of fundamentalism kind of washed through, and oh my God, there's people in the daycare centers molesting children, and there's Satanists, et cetera, et cetera. And law enforcement's actually have training videos on how to confront Satanists. It's bananas. But what all that stuff was about was it was a reaction to feminism, because women were going into the workplace and thus children were going to daycare centers, and there's fear about that, and there's fear about new technologies that are creating separations between people, or like phone lines. 976 phone lines. Could your kid call one during the day and talk to a lady of the night?
You know, talk to Freddie.
Yeah.
You could talk to Freddy Krueger, go to the phone line where you
Yeah. 976 Eagle.
That element of like, what are you, people feeling more hooked, in some ways more connected than ever, but also that sense that connectivity can lead to the sense that you're threatened or your security is in danger. One of my obsessions is kind of horror films that deal with the highway system. And there's a wonder book by Ginger Strand called Killer on the Road that is about kind of both the fictional depictions of kind of, hitchhiking serial killers or serial killers who kill hitchhikers, vice versa, and occasionally When the Twain Shall Meet, which I believe happens in the Masters of Horror TV series. But the element of how did that occur, like, J. Edgar Hoover has a big hand in the demonization of hitchhikers on the interstate because of the fear that if, let's say, college students hitchhike from place to place, they might go to a protest. And there's this element of, people aren't necessarily having that at the top of their mind when they're making Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but the element of like, the idea that you're more mobile than ever in some ways, and that you're more likely to be out of your depth than ever is a wonderful thing to encounter in horror.
Yes.
I wonder if any of those stories were adapted into the film with Rutger Hauer, The
Yes,
Hitcher.
The Hitcher, which is a big, and I think streaming, I think, is obviously a really mixed bag for horror. There's the chance that something can just vanish, and when you don't have a physical copy of it, that it's essentially been taken from you, even if you'd like to hang on to that. But movies like Possession coming to Shudder, or The Hitcher being on HBO, being able to be like, go watch The Hitcher right now, not the remake, the OG. Being able to be like, this film is bananas, and it is doing so many things in terms of both. In general, like, what if there was a scary guy in your car? But also, like, there's some wild subtext in that film around sexuality and about kind of the idea of insiders and outsiders and homicidal drifters as a classic horror genre. And I freaking love it, but it is right on this kind of mid-80s pulse.
And it's great, too, that they actually have movies being shown on Shudder and HBO Max, but go out to theaters. Go to the Parkway, go to the Trilon, find these movies in their original 35mm print. I got to see Possession in 35mm, and yeah, the sound was a little bit off. The picture wasn't quite as great as like a 4K cut of it, but it is just so neat to be in a theater room to see they make this gritty horror film on 35mm and hear the thread pull with it and the sounds. But yeah, support independent theaters because they need your help. Trilon, Parkway, Heights Theater, all play movies in both 70mm, 35mm, and it's just so beautiful to watch that stuff.
Vote with your
I
dollars.
forgot there's a play area outside, and I'm just hearing children scream, so I'm like, oh god. I hope they're okay. I hope they're playing Minecraft.
I hate them.
Oh, thank you, Ashley.
Atmospheric.
Shout out to Ashley, that's my co-host from Cinema Recall right there.
I'm sorry, we interrupted you.
I was going to say that my favorite thing with looking back at retro horror is, like you were saying, to compare and contrast to like how they were feeling then and how they told the same story from then to now. Like my current obsession is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah, that one.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first first horror movie that I watched that like genuinely shook me with its ending. Probably because I watched it at 3 o'clock in the morning, but like, it did not help. And like, we know like, okay, so it's the fear of homogeny, the fear of communism, blah, 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 who cares? But when I watch like remakes or retakes or whatever, like The Faculty, and I get to see it from the perspective of, okay, so your students who are children, who are helpless, and all of the adults around you cannot be relied on, and everyone around you, like from the top down, is also becoming an enemy of yours, and how can you trust the people who are around you? And then I watch something that's even newer, like The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals, that is about a man who's going through the exact same issue. It's still Invasion of the Body Snatchers, except instead of the hive mind also sings. And he hates musicals. He hates the idea of having to be in a musical. And like each of those stories tell a different thing about their protagonists. Like one is just literally, I do not want to be homogenized. And then the next one is, I don't want my friends, my neighbors, my everybody to be my enemy. And then the last one is, I want my own autonomy. I don't want to be forced into something that makes me genuinely uncomfortable. And I like the way that you use the same framework to tell completely different stories.
Yeah.
So really name that movie again where someone didn't like musicals and...
The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals.
That's the movie. Oh gosh, stupid, all right.
I think one of my favorite, so the Stepford Wives, if you guys are familiar with the story, husbands take their wives, turn them into ideal 50s housewives, take out their brains, all that stuff. And I think one of the great things about that story is it goes into this idea of women's liberation, men's fear of women's liberation, and then in one of the greatest updates or like followers is Get Out, where we take this idea of like, how is the body commodified and how was it commodified in the 70s for women, and what does that mean now in terms of race? I think is a really great example of how retro horror and contemporary horror work together. That sort of like evolution and recontextualizing that you're talking about.
That's funny interesting because I read the book, The Stepford Wives.
Oh, I love it, yeah.
I read it.
And then I saw the movie, not the original movie, I saw the remake.
I saw the remake first.
No idea.
It's almost insulting
I didn't
in
know.
terms of how it takes some things that the OG 70s film takes and handles, I would say, pretty seriously and pretty gravely. And we're in this post-feminist 2000s era where it's jaunty and funny to make light of this. And I'm like, this is it's like seeing, if you saw, I grew up in the era of the scary movies. It's like seeing a scary movie parody of something before you see the film itself.
Yeah.
Or like seeing the remake of The Wicker Man before The Wicker Man.
Oh, yeah.
Not the big deal.
I
A
feel
gross
so at
experience.
one panel. Almost everybody knows like, oh, yeah, the 2005 one. I'm afraid of it. So this is very nice to know that I'm in good company.
I will say the remake of The Wicker Man is absolutely fucking bananas.
Speaking of films with a complex relationship to feminism, that
Oh
movie,
my God.
coming out the waz. But there's one thing that I'm really find really interesting in, especially with Jordan Peele, especially, is kind of where this comes from. Because it took me a long time to get to watch Nope because it deals with some subject matter that I find viscerally upsetting. Not even the alien stuff. The chimp attack was too much for me. I think we talked about that at a previous kind of year in horror panel last night. But watching that with a friend who has a deep, deep fear of aliens, was both kind of like, we're coming at it from both sides, we're both having a hard time. And then she's like, does that remind you of the movie Tremors at all? So we end up going back and like, Tremors is not, I would say, an old film. Tremors is a movie that is hard for me to consider like, vintage, but at the same time, like, it's old enough as a 90s film that it is absolutely in Jordan Peele's wheelhouse as a film that you can dip into for when you're writing kind of creature feature horror and you're taking some stuff in that is like a really, really kind of fun, cockeyed spin on that era of creature feature horror. And that's something that I find being able to dip back into an older film and its set of influences is a great way to kind of reverse engineer your older horror film education.
And in following that path to the 90s is a really interesting time for horror, especially movies, because there was this big backlash against the spectacle and the big blockbuster movies and all the crazy stuff that was happening in movies in the 80s, that suddenly people veered off and fell in love with independent movies, and then suddenly the movie studios didn't know what the hell to do. And so there was a lot of throwing darts at the dartboard, and there wasn't much horror coming out, but there was a lot of really great stuff that popped up here and there. Like Tremors is super fun. Lake Placid, I love. Guillermo del Toro started coming out of that with Kronos and
Devil's Backbone.
Devil's Backbone.
Mimic.
David Cronenberg did Existence, which is fascinating. Jacob's Ladder, which is I feel like not talked about enough today. Yeah,
Well-
and Flatliners even in that.
It's also an era of, in my experience, TV horror miniseries adaptations. My intro to horror kind of proper was Stephen King's the TV adaptation of Rose Red. But like, there's a miniseries adaptation of The Shining. There's the Salem's Lot miniseries. I think is older, but it's kind of a keystone moment for a lot of people. And that idea of I would still consider it to be Tom film, but what you're doing, people realize that you can branch out from the cinematic feature film format, for better and for ill, in that era.
Speaking about like the 90s, going back into that, one of the big movies that came out in the 90s was Scream.
Yeah.
And this movie was, I wouldn't say the first big blockbuster, but this was a big blockbuster
It was.
at the time. And if you did not grow up in the 90s, you had no idea how huge this movie was. When they cast Drew Barrymore in this, you're thinking, well, she's going to be this big star because she's been in a whole bunch of things. And then they kill her off in the first like 10 minutes of the movie. Everyone should know about it.
That movie is old enough to be in this panel.
Yeah. But yeah, and I remember like even when it came out to video cassette, people were like, and not only that too, like you had no idea who the killer was, and I just remember this just being a huge thing to have my friends over, and I would watch it, and it's one of those movies you just gotta tell your friends about it. And like, yeah, this guy wears this girl's mask, and this girl gets stuck in a garage door.
Is a terrible time for me.
Oh.
I would say one thing, especially with Scream, and being able to go into that, like not knowing who the killer is, where it hasn't been memed to death. I didn't see us, screenshots without context on Twitter that ended up spoiling it for me as soon as I saw it. Like the predominantly before the full-on embrace of the internet nature of kind of pre-1999, we're starting to get into it, especially later in the decade with stuff like the Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
The alternate reality game underpinning of that. Like you could genuinely go out and be like, that's right, Blair Witch Project is a true story. It really happened. And you can go on the IMDb and be like, no, this check the Wikipedia page. Like, no, this is not the case.
They made documentaries about the Blair Witch Project on actual TV shows, and I totally believed it was real until I saw interviews with the actors the week the movie came out.
Yeah, the first of the viral ad stuff that I saw pop up before the movie was released was actually at the first CONvergence. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Fingers on the pulse.
right? Yeah. It's hard to describe today what a change there was after the Blair Witch Project came out, because that was a whole sea change in the world of horror, especially for movies.
There's also
Especially
an element
in Marketing, too.
Yeah, marketing. The marketing was the brilliant move of Blair Witch, and the rest was just icing on the cake.
I don't think that if Blair Witch Project hadn't done what they did, I don't think that Cloverfield would have been as successful doing what they did.
Yep.
Because the only reason why it is that I ended up getting into Cloverfield was because of the lengths that they went to build websites that weren't real for companies that don't exist. Have people have like Facebooks and MySpaces for people who don't exist, whose stuff got deleted by the government that wasn't enacting anything in real life before the movie actually came out.
Companies have to do so much more to market a film than they had to back in the day. Before, they just had a teaser and a trailer and a few TV spots and radio spots were coming soon this Friday. You will jump out of your seat. Something truly horrifying and scary. Come now. That sort of thing. But now they have to do all these, like, you have to look at Instagram account and Facebook account and Twitch and TikToks. And that's why Madrid did very well, because of all their TikTok videos and everything. And if it didn't have that, I don't know if the movie was done so well. Because, oh no, it was moved by Killer Doll than before. It's just jumping to it.
I will say one thing that we still have this very much in kind of. Scream was obviously, not the Scream, dear Lord. Blair Witch Project was not the first mockumentary, it was not the first mockumentary horror, but people have gotten, I would say, a little bit, for the most part, wiser to the concept of a mockumentary or to an alternate reality game. But when you have something that has a really long afterlife, like there's a 70s made-for-TV horror mockumentary, science fiction horror mockumentary, Alternative 3, where the notion is that the Cold War is all fake, and they're actually putting, I think it's on like, there's a brain drain on Earth because they're taking all these scientists and putting them on another planet with the expectation that Earth will be unlivable and we have to live in space. But the government isn't telling you this. And like, it was an April Fool's Day program. It was a bunch of British guys thinking that this would be really funny and that they could make it look real and have people believe it for the duration of the show. Or stuff like Ghost Watch, where the same idea of a mock TV broadcast that goes horrifically off the rails really got under people's skin. And some of that is the element of, I think, ephemerality. Like, I couldn't just go on YouTube and search like Alternative 3 real question mark. But there's also the element of when it's harder to get something and you know less and less about it, it's easier to strip it from the context that might make you preconceived to see it in a certain way. And sometimes that means I was so excited for this movie and then I saw it and it's trash. And sometimes that means, everybody told me this movie would be, everybody told me that this movie was mediocre. Like Season of the Witch is considered a real dud, but if you're in it for like chills, thrills, and spills, but if it is the kind of thing that you like, you're gonna really like it. Kind of the accessibility has made that more available, but also more ephemeral.
Now, Scott, when you do say Season of the Witch, I'm always going to think of Halloween 3.
Yes.
Season of the Witch.
It's also
I told you.
It's also called Hungry Wives and Jack's Wife.
Okay, Hungry Wives is a better title. I like that way better. That's a way better title.
To essentially be a softcore porn film when they made it Hungry Wives, whereas Jack's Wife, the whole idea is that the main character, she's constantly defined by her marriage, and at the end, when she's spoilers, kills her husband using witchcraft. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're Jack's wife," and she's like, "Yeah, I was." It's like it's a different take, but at the same time, you could just up and change a movie title for marketing purposes.
Yeah. They've done it before many times.
Yeah, I mean, I think you still can, but it's a little bit harder.
Live, die, repeat. So, oh goodness. Yeah, we, Season of the Witch, the Halloween 3, bouncing off of Nigel Neal. Because Nigel Neal didn't he do the original
Quatermass.
Yeah.
Quatermass
Experiment.
Quatermass Experiment, Beasts,
Yeah.
all that. And now that's interesting because John Carpenter certainly did a lot of riffs off of him. So, like, I'd say, like, John Carpenter. I've been on non-stop panels today. I am so sorry.
Listen, maybe you're just a really big John Carter Mars fan. You're a really big Taylor Swift fan.
Okay. No, it's Prince of Darkness is what I was trying to get at, and that's a movie that terrified me beyond my expectations, and I don't exactly know why or can explain it. But if you're watching it late at night,
That one did?
yeah,
The green slime?
yeah, the green slime and the
Was it the guy? Was the guy standing outside with like no eyes?
yeah, and Alice Cooper and
Yeah.
yeah, that one. Yeah, hey, you know, to
Fair
each their
enough.
own. So, we'll take a moment. Does anybody in the audience have anything? Pink.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about, so I have recently, like last year, read The Bad Seed and watched the 1950s.
Great.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the Hays Code and the effect of the ending of, or even just horror as a whole, because the ending was completely changed due to the Hays Code.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hays Code. Yeah, Hays Code has a big deal to do with the fact that horror just exploded in the 70s. Because the Hays Code didn't really start to fall apart until the late 60s when, like, you read about when Easy Rider came out.
They're getting kind of independent.
Yeah, and so where a lot of the horror of the 60s, 50s, and 40s, you kind of had to glance off of anything really explicit, and you couldn't say, directly talk about, certain subjects like homosexuality or whatnot. Once that fell apart, movie directors and screenwriters like, oh my God! And then suddenly you got like The Exorcist and The Omen and.
I mean, it was shocking when they had a toilet in the cycle. That was
It was shocking to have that
toilet, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, like,
Or married couples with only one bed rather than several. Is this like that?
one of the things that I find very interesting about, especially with The Bad Seed, where there's an element at the end where it's almost like the film is, it's built up this sense of unease, and it's like, don't worry, it's fake. Or if you see The Night of the Hunter, which is a wonderful, black and white Charles Lawton horror movie, complete dud at the time, because it's this really weird, dark, atmospheric, 1930s Southern Gothic, Great Depression era, psychosexual horror nightmare about evil woman-hated preacher. But at the end of it, Lillian Gish is just like, it's all fine. The children will abide. Don't worry. They'll be okay. And it's like, will they be? But at the same time, like that's not a thing that a modern, like you might feel the pressure to put that in a modern horror film, but you would not have that pressure applied by a literal external body being like, hey, you can't have this in your movie, or you can't have the intimation that the villain gets away with this.
And a lot of times too, they don't even give you the courtesy to show you what happens to the characters. They'll just cut to black and have text be on the screen and just tell you what happened there.
I also think with the sequence in Psycho where it's very easy to make fun of, where the psychiatrist comes out who's like, let me explain to you what's wrong with Norman Bates. Like, I joke about how I want every horror movie to have a sequence like that, where it's like, let me tell you all about this issue that we're featuring. Like, and it's just such a hallmark of the era, but at the same time, like the notions of, almost you want to have, like you're at a bowling alley and you have bumpers on the aisles. Like there's an element of, what are you getting when you're getting a horror movie? And do you have the expectation that you're gonna leave the theater feeling like you had some chills, thrills, and spills, but ultimately you're not leaving this theater a broken person, versus the way that people, like, even leaving the theater after some recent horror films feeling pretty shaken. Like it's a very different experience when you don't have the expectation of how a movie will end, just based on the fact that it's in theaters.
Also, throwing it back down to the other end of the table, this might be a good time to touch upon, like with remakes, where we have the original movie made in like the Hays Code era, and now we're making a modern version, or a version even just made 20 years later, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Or it wasn't even 20 years. It's interesting to me to see what happens to the story once they have those leashes removed. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well,
Sorry.
I'd be able to speak to it better if, what dates are we talking about?
Well, like specifically with the original Body Snatchers, what?
56.
56?
56, yeah.
Thank you.
Done sequel.
And then the sequel,
Phil Kaufman was like 78.
and then
I mean the dates of like, when was the Hays Code established?
the Hays Code
Stop
was
here.
established in 1932.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't, I'm kind of upset about the fact that in my rewatching of stuff, I had watched Rosemary's Baby for the first time, and then found that there was a mini-series with Zoe Saldana that was remade of Rosemary's Baby, and it's 4 hours, and I can't, with all of this stuff, I can't do that too.
The audiobook is barely 4 hours.
Yeah, I don't want to. Anyway, I think they're including with commercial breaks. Well, it's whatever. I will watch it after this panel. That doesn't help us right now. But I'm pretty sure that the differences, at least in the beginning, is that we have Zoe Saldana in the role, as opposed to like we have the changing of the races changes like flat out a whole bunch immediately.
Yeah.
That Satan decided to choose a black woman to be the heir, to bear his heir. And if you, like, just putting her in there changes literally all of the story beats. And I can't imagine what else would be fundamentally different. Like, will they have her getting drugged for a long period of time after she gives birth? Like, I don't know about any of that yet, but I'm hoping not. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for all of its various iterations, I see a lot less of people's, like there's not, I've never seen one where they have pods anymore. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was like a specific part of the horrificness to people versus whether or not we want to cut it out now. Because in the faculty, they had parasites that were crawling under people's skin, which I find to be significantly more disturbing than having a pod that had a clone of me in it. And in the guy who doesn't like musicals, they're just infested with goo. Like their entire body is rewritten, and there is no parasite present.
You should also see Night of the Creeps.
Yes!
But it's also about parasitic aliens. And a movie that's playing at the Cinemarets is The Hidden, which is also about parasitic aliens. And these 2 cops are trying to find out which one of the town is possessed by The Hidden. but Charlie Kaufman is in it today, and
Yeah.
it's really great.
Kyle MacLachlan as a clueless alien who's pretending to be an LA cop. And he's just like smiling and just kind of clueless, and he's paired up with a real human cop, and
It's almost like a Men in
it's
Black,
wonderful.
but a very gritty Men in Black.
Yeah, it's a great Men in Black.
One of the things, that, especially with why are there no pods in these later adaptations, the elements of horror that get discarded as being silly, I think are interesting, are the elements that become so definitive of an era that people shy away from incorporating them in later, even later adaptations of the same story. Like, I think of the Thing from Another World versus
Yeah.
John Carpenter's The Thing. It's
Yeah.
a pretty big dichotomy, but like, the elements that get added and the elements that get subtracted, especially when it's a story that's been adapted multiple times, like there's a zillion movie adaptations of Dracula, there's many, many adaptations of Turn of the Screw, and what they take and what they leave behind is often really indicative of the era, but there's also a little bit of element of cringe against what's a retro horror to the filmmaker at that time, but not in a cool way.
Yeah.
Like elements of, you know, if you're making a movie in the 70s, like I think of all the stuff that's German Expressionism influenced, but that's a very different experience than if you're making a German Expressionist inflected movie in the 1950s, for instance.
Right.
But give me some examples of like German Expressionism. Would it be like examples of that being
So
used
even
now?
like Nosferatu,
Yes.
what is like that is a straight up adaptation of the OG Nosferatu versus I will say like Night of the Hunter is influenced it to some degree, or like they made a remake of M in the 1950s, where they sure did. It's an American remake of M.
Oh, wow.
And it has a very different relationship because, I mean, to be blunt, it has a very different understanding of what kind of person kills a child, or especially what kind of person is a child predator in 1950s America versus 1920s, 1930s Germany, where they still had them, but in a different way. And that kind of element of how is our understanding of this issue changing in a movie where that's subtext versus straight up text is an element that I think sometimes gets adapted for the worse. Like it's not necessarily there's a little bit more reining in when you're having to deal with not just the Hays Code, but also what's the prevailing doctrine of your era about how people who do murder should get punished.
There's an interesting flip in Slumber Party Massacre.
Yeah!
Because so the original Slumber Party Massacre is a fascinating movie because it was made in the early 80s, and yes, it's your kind of standard ladies having a slumber party and then, oh no, a killer is on the loose sort of movie. But it was made by women. It was written by women. It was directed by women.
Famous, like groundbreaking lesbian author Rita Mae Brown.
Yes. And so it has a totally different flair, and yet they are still making a very kind of tropey, schlocky slasher movie. And within the last 2 years, Danishka Esterhazy made a remake. It is wonderful. It is actually really pretty great.
How does that compare to Bodies?
I haven't seen
Bodies
yet, unfortunately. But I will say that the new Slumber Party Massacre is delightfully feminist and even has like a second house on the lake that has a bunch of guys having a slumber party. And they're the ones being like having the feathers with the pillow fight and they're like tearing their clothes off and whenever they run somewhere it's
as we
really
do.
and it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see it all flipped around like that.
I loved Charlene giving a shout out to Bodies, because in some ways that movie is very in tune with kind of slasher movie tropes, or a bunch of really beautiful kind of some would say annoying young people are in a spooky old house for the weekend and the power goes out and there's a killer among them. Or they conclude that there's a killer among them pretty damn fast. But it's also like, for me that movie also feels like it has a throwback to stuff like Haunting of Hill House, like where there's the interpersonal tension is a reflection, like the external threat of the killer is almost like amplified by the internal tensions of the characters themselves, which I was not expecting from a movie that the advertising is very like, haha, they're on Twitter a lot and they're gay. And I'm like, well, they are and they are, but also like that movie has really deep roots in horror for a movie that plays with that genre a lot.
It just reminded me of like an Agatha Christie mystery, and then there was none.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That type of story, because you just have no idea what's going to happen next or who the killer is. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really quite matter, and I kind of like the twist of that, but yeah.
Yeah, it really reminded me thematically of the Twilight Zone episode. I think it was like it happened on Bleecker Street or something.
Yeah.
The monsters on Maple Street.
There it is.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. The Monsters on Maple Street, where it's like, it's at the core, it is each other. That's the problem. I really like it. I hope the movie that you suggested is very similar.
Oh.
So we are down to our last few minutes. I did want to ask one last thing of all of our panelists. What is the one retro book, movie, or show that you most want to share with the audience? What is the, I give this to you, go watch it.
All right, I'll give one, and it's one from my childhood, and it's the first thing that I was ever given to read or listen to. Besides Gremlins, I collected a whole bunch of like Gremlins audio records. Have no idea what Gremlins was, but I was terrified of Gremlins. The most terrifying story I ever had as a kid was Berenstain Bears and the Spooky Old Tree. And it uses a lot of the same musical cues that I have heard in The Shining, and that's why that movie still terrifies me to this day. But it's about the bears going to see the spooky old trees. But the music in that, as a kid, just terrified me. I listened to it again, and yeah, I can see why that still terrifies me, and I'm gonna bring that up now.
Oh, no, go ahead. My recommendation, it's from the early 90s. It's called The Chinese Ghost Story. I've never even heard of it.
I've heard this.
You will have to find it it'll be legal, I promise. But it's a mix of like a martial arts film with the effects, like the practical effects of the Evil Dead trilogy with like a really beautiful love story kind of all worked together. So it's like a horror comedy. And it's just one of the best movies I've seen in a while. It's had an absolute blast, especially if you love practical effects. It's primo, it's a great movie.
I don't know many deep cuts. I think the one that technically works as being retro would be the Red Shoes, but specifically the one from South Korea. That one was very good. I would give that to you.
This one's a little bit more mainstream, but Phantasm has recently been remastered, and it looks beautiful. During the pandemic, when we were all stuck inside, that October I went through and I watched like every single Nightmare on Elm Street, every single Phantasm film, every single Friday the 13th, etc. First of all the Phantasm movies are increasingly bonkers as they go along. They just get weird. But the first one is delightfully strange, and it kind of mashes up kind of a haunted house thing, and then aliens come into it later, and then there's a weird flying ball thing that sticks you in your head, and then your head just explodes. But anyway, it is delightfully creepy. It's very strange, and it doesn't feel very tropey when you watch it, even today. And it's beautiful. And the way it got remastered was when J.J. Abrams was working on The Force Awakens. Whenever the special effects team had downtime, he said, "Let's clean up Phantasm." And that's what they did.
Oh, nice.
And so here we are.
All right.
In addition to Jack's Wife / Season of the Wish / Hungry Wives, 1985, Frank Rodham's The Bride, which is a retelling of kind of both Universal Horror's Bride of Frankenstein, the whole conceit of that, the 60s and 70s Hammer horror Frankenstein kind of ethos. It is Jennifer Beals, Sting, and Clancy Brown as the creature. And it has this bonkers 80s does 60s gorgeousness to it, but it also has really very much kind of 80s era considerations about feminism and women's independence, but also just Jennifer Beals being gorgeous, running through a big spooky house, wearing a big white dress, and it kicks ass.
Is that streaming anywhere?
I believe so, and if it's not, hunt it down by one way or another. And Sting in his gothic demon lover horror movie guy era, absolutely killing it, and it makes you can do a weird double feature with Labyrinth if you really wanted to, but I really want to.
Okay, it says it's on Amazon, Apple TV, Google Play, and yeah, you can get it.
One small recommendation I'll recommend movie is a little older movie, House of the Devil.
Yeah.
It's a really good kind of like throwback, because it looks like it came in the late 80s, like a lost horror film. It's about this girl who gets the job as babysitter and it's not going well for her.
And I'm very sad. I'm sorry I did not see you earlier.
It's okay. This is a super quick add-on to an earlier conversation about how the characters themselves are kind of the villains, which reminded me of the game Corpse Party, which has a million remakes. But it's a very good depiction of like visual, pixel, and like verbal horror and audio horror, and it's all in one game, and it's amazing. And it's about they're like trapped in a school, and they all kind of turn on each other.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we are at time. If you had additional recommendations or wanted to chat with us,